Hey, thanks so much for listening to the Ridge Community Church podcast. My name is John. I'm one of the pastors at the Ridge, and our vision is to bring the hope of Jesus into every home. So we want to bring you something hopeful and helpful for your everyday life, whether you've been following Jesus for a while or you're still trying to figure out exactly what you do believe about God. Now, you'll find on this podcast things that'll help with conversations about marriage and parenting and mental health and work, practical things to help you in your faith journey, and a lot more. So whether you're listening to this on your favorite podcast app or you're watching on YouTube, be sure to follow and subscribe so that you don't miss any of the hopeful and helpful conversations. Hey everyone, and thanks for listening to this episode of the Ridge Podcast. My name is John, and I'm excited to share with all of you a conversation that I got to have with Brodie Swanson. This last weekend, Brodie taught on the topic of perseverance and how can you show resilience and how can you work through challenging seasons in your life and rely on God in the process. So if you missed any of that, I want to encourage you to catch up either here on the podcast or on our YouTube channel. But today in our conversation, we talk about, was there anything left out of the message? What are some really practical things about applying some of the principles in the conversation? And really, overall, how do you get through a challenging season? This is my conversation with Brodie. Well, hey, Brodie, thanks for coming out of the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's good to see you.
Yeah, and I just gotta let you know. So over in Seattle, we've got some snow. It's finally happened. It's our first of the year. We've got a couple inches on the ground over here. How are things going over there for you guys?
Oh man, it was perfect for our Saturday morning. I walked out. It's like 45 degrees, perfect. I wake up Sunday morning. I let my dog out, and we got an inch of snow on the ground. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me! But it got up to 50 degrees. It all melted away. So we are now once again gray and brown and ugly. So.
Tell me how you really feel. Yeah.
Oh, man. I'd much rather have snow. Just give me snow. As long as it melts March 1st, I'm a happy man.
You know, I don't think there's anything that really exemplifies our topic today more than the Wisconsin winter. Because when you think about perseverance, I mean, it's like, wow, that is winter in Wisconsin in a nutshell. Just that long, enduring, a challenging time.
Yes.
Where you're uncomfortable and you just kind of make it through and keep fighting. Maybe that should have been your metaphor from the weekend is the,
the winter. I led off with the top talking about, Puxatawny Phil saw his shadow. So, we're going to need perseverance to make it through the next 6 weeks. So,
yeah. Okay, so thinking about this last weekend, and if anybody's listening, you haven't had a chance to hear it yet, I would encourage you to do that. You can catch it on this podcast or on our YouTube channel. And Brodie, you just did a really great job of, I think, outlining both the challenges of perseverance, how no one really likes that to be their they want that characteristic in themselves, but they don't want to actually be going through I'll call it the work of it. But then you gave some really helpful framework for how to engage with that. As you were working on this, it's kind of a big topic to kind of to share in a limited time span. And so I'm curious, is there anything that you were like, man, I really wanted to share this thing, but I couldn't fit it in? Or maybe there was a portion that you're like, man, I had to spend more time than usual setting this portion up, and so I didn't get to dive into the meat over here. Anything that comes to your mind?
Yeah, and I think the brief recap is, James really tells us, hey, we can consider it to be a good thing when we're having to deal with perseverance, developing moments in our lives because something bigger is at work. And then the story that we took out of Mark chapter 5 really highlights her journey. But one of the things that we don't see in either of those places is the role of community in making it through perseverance and having a good perspective. I heard a guy from a church out west, and he referred to it as having your no-quit team around you. And so you've got your internal characteristics of saying, hey, I gotta recalibrate my mind. I gotta have a different perspective. I know that God's in it with me, and those two things together are the foundation. But if I'm just doing it on my own, the way that we're built as human beings, it's a whole lot more difficult if we don't have people around us who know what's going on in our life. And that's a big piece of it. I mean, especially for guys, actually letting somebody into that journey of saying, here's the hard. And so I'm going to tell you about it because even though I'm a guy and I want to be invincible, I know that I'm not. And then having those people who would say, oh, now that you've told me, I'm in. I'm going to help. I'm going to stand by. I'm going to check in. I'm going to do all those things. I'll be a sounding board. So that's one of the things that hit the cutting room floor because neither of those passages really brought it out. And if you try to add something in 27 minutes that's just kind of out of left field, it doesn't really play well.
So when you say that community element, are you thinking of it from a lens of like an accountability, like I won't let you give up? Or are you thinking about it from a lens of kind of more of an internal motivation of like, oh, I know these people are counting on me too, and so I don't want to give up on them. Because there's that like kind of like that teamwork thing, like, oh, maybe I would give up because it'd be too hard, but I don't want to let these other people down, and so I keep on going. What kind of framework are you thinking with that?
So the way that my mind was working on that was, I think it's twofold. I think it's the team that knows what's going on, and when it gets hard, they're in it with you, saying you don't need to give up. You got people around you. The other side of that, though, is having people outside of your situation tell you when you actually need to move on from something that maybe you've been persevering in. Now, I mean, we all deal with like, hey, medical issues and physical issues and stuff like that. But there's sometimes issues in our lives where, you know what, it's actually healthy and beneficial to say, this isn't good for me and I need to draw some boundaries in my life. I've tried. I've walked into it with perseverance. I've walked into it with a forgiving spirit. But this doesn't seem to be heading a healthy direction. And so I actually need to move on from it for now in order to be healthy and whole.
Almost that kind of separation between what is I'm persevering through a challenge that I need to persevere through versus I'm being stubborn inside of a situation and I don't know, maybe it's a job situation, right? That's actually like maybe it's harmful for your for whatever your situation is, and you actually need to move into a different scenario, that outside perspective that's able to give you that. Yeah,
that's kind of the no quit team. Hey, I'm not going to quit on what's best for you. And so when it's hard, I'm in it with you. When you need perspective, I'm willing to say it in a way that hopefully is caring and kind and clear.
Okay, so maybe we can make that practical real quick. So if you're looking for a no-quit team, okay, you either have one and maybe they just need to be shared with. Is that fair? Or you're looking for one?
Yeah.
Maybe one like step you could do for either one of those things?
Well, I think finding the right people first is the key. I mean, there's plenty of people who be your rah-rah people. You can do it. You go for it. I got your back. And then I don't know that you need that type of person to be having your back. I think you're looking for people that have a little bit of wisdom and discernment, that they know you, they understand the situation, and you trust that they're thinking well about it. I think the other characteristic of somebody on a no-quit team would be somebody who knows how to listen. Because when you're in a tough spot, it takes discipline for somebody who's in it with you to really listen instead of try to fix or finish your sentences for you or all of those things. But they can actually listen. They're trying to kind of hear where the heart of things are and encourage you where you need encouragement and just be in it with you where you need them to be in it with you. And so I think that wisdom and discernment as well as good listening is a key piece to that. But then you just really need to ask people. I think that people will shy away from getting in your business. We live in a society where, everybody stays in their lane. And if you don't ask somebody to be part of that lane, many times they aren't going to know how to fully engage. And when you ask somebody to be part of it, maybe the next step to that is saying, well, what does that mean to me? What do I actually need from you? What does winning look like? I don't know if that's a great term in this one, but what does it mean to actually be doing this well? And I think when you can give people that clarity because you've kind of worked through it in your head, or you can say, here's what I know so far, and can we figure out the rest along the way, and just to commit to talking about it and processing through it, then I think that's the best way to start.
I love that too, because I think you outlined some really great things for somebody to look for as they themselves are somebody else's support too, right? Because I think that's the other side of this, is that it's not a one-way street, right? The concept is you're going through it together, and that may be challenging if you're in a season that's particularly difficult, and there may be a time where just, oh yeah, you're receiving support, but also reciprocating that too, right? To where you're somebody who's able to be a listener, you're able to seek wisdom so then you can offer wisdom. I imagine that's a big piece of that too.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's right on.
Yeah. Before we move on, any other things that you were like, man, I really wanted to talk about this?
I really wanted to talk more about what a mindset to keep going looks like. Because I think we live in a world that tells you if it's not coming quickly, then you should be pivoting and going a different direction. And sometimes in God's view for our life, he's actually asking us to lean in and make it through certain situations when other people would say it's smart to bail. I don't think anybody likes to say, hey, I'm a quitter, or I look for the easy way out. But when we start looking at what the culture around us, or even the people that we're surrounded with, would say, hey, you've hit your limit. You really should look towards something else. This isn't smart anymore. I think sometimes a mindset of saying, I'm going to be in it. I know that something good's going to happen out of this, and I'm going to see it through. I think that mindset is more difficult on a daily basis than people give it credit for. But sometimes it's committing to keep going that makes a big difference.
Is there anything that helps somebody kind of develop that mindset?
That's a really great question. I don't know. I mean, and you're the guy running the podcast, so you should have really great questions. But the first answer that comes to my mind on that is experience. I think it's hard when you don't have experience, but as you start to get reps where you said, hey, I'm going to see this through, and if I just develop a mindset that says, yeah, this is going to get hard for a season, and I just got to get through that season because on the other side, it's going to be different. I go back to the example I used in the message of just, I had a catastrophic knee injury. If I just have the surgery and let things go the way they are, my knee will never be whole. It'll be fine. It'll be functional, but it'll never be whole. And I think what physical therapy did was it's a process that you just have to grit it out sometimes. And then you can get to the other side and find that there's something better on the other side than you could have predicted on the front side of it. And I think there's situations in our life, whether they be financial, where you just got to buckle down and run a budget, and it feels bad, and you got to say no to a lot of things that feel good. But when you get to the other side, there's a wholeness there and a discipline and a reward of perspective that's been earned that you couldn't get if you just decided to borrow more money or run up the credit cards or things like that. So I think there's a number of situations. Relational ones get tricky because the payoff, so to speak, on the other side isn't as defined usually. And so relationships, there's a lot of gray in there. And I know we don't like gray as people, so we tend to pivot more quickly.
Yeah, I keep coming back to, I was given this really great advice once about just get the premise of seeing something all the way through, and there are going to be times where, at least I know I was in a challenging season of like kind of given an out, and the out seems like, oh yeah, this could work. This is the wise decision. And I got some really good counsel about this person that was giving this advice was an avid hunter. And so he was talking to me about walking all the way, the full field, essentially, because there might be a duck or a pheasant or something at the end of the field that's going to fly up. And if you give up halfway, you're not going to get that reward because you didn't see something all the way through. And I think that's really good advice. That I think speaks to this whole situation of, you're going to have things that come up that make you uncomfortable. But persevering looks like seeing something through all the way. As long as that's a healthy thing. I think that's always the caveat we give, which is a challenging, umbrella thing. And I think that goes back to your, hey, seeking wisdom, having community and the framework and that's so many of the things we talk about even on this podcast, right? It's these are general principles. Yeah. And there's always going to be exceptions to you shouldn't see that, thing that's actively harming you through all the way, maybe, because that's something to quit. But that's not necessarily the context of our current conversation. But
yeah, there was one other thing that kind of came up, and I used the term quite a bit, called godly perseverance. And I think that's part of mindset as well, is the mindset that in all of these difficult spaces, God is at work. Whether the difficult spaces came at me from the outside or they came at me because I did something and walked away from his best for me because of who I am humanly, that in all of those things, he's still at work. I think I grew up with in a section of Christianity that would say that if bad things are happening to you, it's probably because God's upset. You've done something in your life to make him mad, and now this is your punishment. And I think that what that does is it leads us towards fixing and correcting a whole lot more than it leads us towards experiencing what he's going to bring about in a difficult spot. And I'm not saying that sin doesn't get us into a difficult spot sometimes, because it truly does, and there's ramifications for that. But not every time that I have a trial or something is very difficult, it's not because I messed up. There's just, life is difficult, and the journey that we have as human beings is going to have difficult moments. And godly perseverance says, hey, in the middle of this, God's involved. And so if I can lean in to that space, then maybe God can bring about something in me that easy circumstances wouldn't do.
It sounds like that's asking a different question, right? It's like, instead of asking like, why is God mad at me in this situation? It's, what does God want me to learn right now in this moment?
Yeah. He's for me. Now, what is he for in this situation being developed in me? That's a whole different mindset. And to be honest with you, in the upper Midwest, we have grown up with an interesting view of God sometimes. And I know it happens other places, but for sure in some denominations, we teach that God has to punish us to get us back in line. And I just think that the more I look at Scripture and the older I get, God's different than that.
Yeah. Hey, Brodie, how do you keep a healthy perspective with that? I think that's one of those, because that's one of those topics, like, that's such a loaded phrase, like, oh yeah, God's gonna teach you something through this. Is someone's going through a trial or something like that. That can be a very, I think almost like that can be like a unhelpful thing to share with somebody, in the right times. How do you keep the right like perspective on that for your own life, you think?
Okay, for my own life, you asked my personal opinion, so you're going to get it. I don't think that every difficult situation is one that God is trying to teach me something. I think God's greatest desire for every moment in my life is that I would understand how to experience him in deeper ways. And so whether that is in good situations or difficult situations, I don't think his primary goal is to teach me a lesson and everything. I think his primary goal is to build a deeper connection. He wants me to know who he is because he knows who I am. And so I think that's the first thing that I know, is that that's his primary goal, is that we would know him better, be connected to him deeper, and just be able to follow him more clearly. That's his primary goal. I think the collateral goal, for lack of a better term, is that as we journey through those things, he knows we're going to learn things through experience and pain that nothing else can teach us. And so I think if I look at it from that point of view, and I can talk myself out of, and I'm really serious about that, I have to talk myself out of the fact that I think he's mad. Because it was ingrained in me as a kid. And so I have to go, okay, God is for me. Do I believe that? And if I believe that he's for me, then in this situation where I feel like I'm in a difficult spot, what's the primary thing he wants from me? Well, the primary thing he wants from me is to turn to him. And then as he walks with me through difficult moments, whether they're caused by things externally or my own fault, he journeys with me and I experience more of who he is. And if I can experience more of who he is, that's how I become a different person.
Yeah.
Is that way too complicated?
No, I think what you have done is help us remember that perspective of like starting with like the main thing that God wants. And I think that's a very helpful framework, because I think that then you read into the other things with that lens of God is for me. And versus God wants something from me. And I think those two things, like, one, like, gives us the perspective of like deeper relationship and I think a more meaningful life. And the other is like that feeling of being used. I think that it just helps us read into all the other questions and those things in a way that's, I think, more true to what God has for us. But I want to dive in. You mentioned this idea of, okay, turning to God. I know that was like one of the things that I really took from your talk was this line: we don't just try to survive, we lean in. And that's not a direct quote, but that's essentially, that was one of the principles. Is that you're going through something hard. Our temptation is just get through it, right? But instead, when we lean in, it really makes those challenges more meaningful and more helpful for our life long term, right? What do you think it looks like to lean into God? I'll just unpack that question. Giant mess. Yeah.
So I think we have two choices when hard stuff comes. And we see it throughout the stories of the Bible, is you can either lean in or run away from God. And run away says, well, this must be caused by you, and so I need to go find another place to be because it'll be easier and it'll be less painful. I mean, we see that with Jonah. Jonah's like, and he's being asked to go here. He doesn't lean into that. He runs away. And that gets him into trouble in and of itself, because the further we run away from God, the more we realize that alone we can't do it. And then it's hard to walk back. So when I talk about leaning into God, what I mean is, foundationally, I start to look at it and go, okay, God, what are you doing here? What are you doing? Not why have you done this to me, but what are you doing in this place? And I think it goes back to the realization that I had while I was working through the message, is that the process is just as important as the product for God. Is that, there's that whole phrase in James chapter 1 that says, mature and complete, not lacking anything. Hey, this picture that I have arrived in a better place and I'm much more like Jesus than I used to be. Some people are like, well, that's what God wants. And so in any way possible, including faking it, I'm going to try to get there. And actually leaning in says, oh, in order to get there, God's going to use a process. Now the question is, do I trust that his process is better than mine? Because I can think of a process to get there, and it includes helping everybody think that I have arrived at all of those things instead of actually having arrived there. And I don't know about you, but I can fake it pretty well. And so if I feel like, if I fake it and everybody thinks that I've arrived there, when really I haven't done the internal work because I didn't go through the process that God was going to have me in, eventually you get exposed as a fraud. And so leaning in, fraud's a strong word, sorry. But anyways, the process of leaning in is almost a surrender of saying, okay, I know that there's something here. I'm going to surrender to the fact that maybe you know the journey that I need to be on better than I do. And so I'm going to give it my best shot. And knowing that in that process, I'm going to waver. I am human. And when it gets hard, I'm going to be like, should I really be doing this? Is this something I can trust? Is it heading me the right direction? And in those moments that I just trust that if I continue to lean in and say, okay, God, speak to me, give me wisdom, give me discernment, give me clarity, give me something, give me a little bit of hope in this, that he's going to respond if it's truly the direction that he wants us to go.
Do you think the day-to-day of leaning in, is that asking questions? Is that more prayer time? Is that like, I know these are habits that are helpful for me in terms of my spiritual life, and I'm going to keep on running the plays, that I know are helpful, instead of backing away because it's almost like it would cause you to go to places, either emotionally or whatever, that are more uncomfortable. Like, do you feel like that's a fair assessment, or what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's some of those things. I think the word that I came to mind when you were saying all these things is consistency. Do I think consistency is a part of that? Just doing the next right thing consistently? Yeah, but I think it's more than that, because it's not turning your brain and your emotions off. And I think there's sometimes when people think, well, if I'm going to surrender, I need to turn my emotions off because this is just what I should do. And I need to turn my brain off because, you know what, God's going to show it to me and it's just going to suddenly appear out of nowhere. I think the part of perseverance is trusting God enough to let my emotions and my intellect be in the middle of this whole thing. So I get to ask questions and I get to be mad. And I get to say, what in the world are you up to? I do not understand this, and I am extremely frustrated. And understand, as I've said other times, God's a big boy. He can handle my venting just like a really good friend can. And if I don't do that, then somehow I am cutting short the relationship. And so in those moments saying, hey, if I'm going to lean in and I'm going to do that on a daily basis, then it's got to be me, all of me, connecting to as much of him as I can understand. And that means it's going to look different than just me going, okay, God, what's next? What do I think obedience looks like? What do I think surrender looks like? And then just, checking my brain and my emotions at the door. I think it's bringing all of me to the process and understanding that all of him wants to be in it with all of me. And then let's see where that goes.
That sounds like a very relational process. Like I think about like your friendships or things like that. If they're going through a challenging time, like maybe they either checked out or I guess checked in. You know what I mean? Like check out or you lean in, right? And when you think about it in terms of like a relationship, right? I think that just makes sense. Like it makes sense that you could bring what you're really thinking, what you're really doing to the forefront, and not trying to. Because I think that's like a subtle way of actually like not leaning in is pretending how you feel. You know what I mean? It's like that, like, oh, of course I'm okay with this, God, because it's, you're doing something. And it's like, well, maybe the reality of leaning God in. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Maybe the reality of leaning in is like, God, this is really frustrating to me, but I'm going to continue to trust you. Like that feels authentic and real and leaning in more so than like, I guess that's fine, God. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, well, I think there's the moments in the whole thing to where you have to sometimes go, God, I'm really frustrated. What should I do next? Who have you put around me that I could ask and go, hey, what does this look like from your perspective? How do I bring that community of wisdom back into the picture? And that's where I think the story of the bleeding woman that we talked about, very individualistic and very helpful on an individual level. But I think God uses both his voice and the voice of the community to communicate with us what he wants out of our lives and how we can survive some of these really difficult processes.
Yeah, speaking of the woman who is suffering from bleeding, you kind of use that to bring out 3 points to really help through your perseverance. The idea of keep going, face your fears, and then knowing where the true power comes from. Once again, if you haven't listened to it yet, highly encouraged, listen to those parts because Brodie's going to kind of outline it better probably than we will just in this, the time we have here. But curious, how do you feel like those 3 things kind of work in concert? Maybe they build upon one another to really help you go through and respond to a challenging season?
Well, I think the first 2 really hit at our biggest obstacles, consistency and fear, and I think that that woman was not perfect, and neither are we. But there's something about just continuing to say, let's keep going, that gets us to the next thing. And if we keep going, inevitably we're going to run into whatever it is that we're afraid of. And some of the things I outlined there are, some people feel like I can't do this, or I can't handle this pain, or everybody I know is not going to understand, they're going to walk away, or it's not worth it after all. And those fears just keep coming up again and again. It's not like you move into fear, you conquer the fear, and then you move past the fear. And anybody who tells you that that's the case is probably trying to sell you something. But the reality is that fear and consistency are tied, because you're going to run into fear, and the consistency keeps you going while you work through that fear. And then you're going to go get through that fear for a little while, and then you may either re-encounter it again when the situation changes, or you're going to run into another one that you didn't know you had. And so all of those things, the first two are very much about what I can do. I can make some choices. The third one says, I can't make enough choices to make it through to the other side in a way that's actually going to develop in me something significant. If I try to do it on my own, all I'm going to get is what I can do. Mm-hmm. And I don't know about you, but I want more than that. Yeah. I want more than what I can do for myself. And so that's where the woman received healing supernaturally. And I think she knew before she got there that all the searching that she had done was now at an end, because this was the thing she'd been looking for. And I think for us, I don't know that we always know that. I don't know that we look at God and say, well, that's what I've always been looking for. But once we get into the moment and we say, hey, I can't do all this on my own. I can't get to the spot that I was really hoping to get on my own. I need a power outside of myself. And we know that God is the power that can move it from only what we can do to a combination of our perseverance meets his power. And whatever isn't possible on our own now becomes possible because there's something else there. So I think they build on each other from an individual level. Here's what we can do, but it's never going to be enough. And so we need something outside of ourselves, outside of a human effort that can actually get us to where we need to go.
Yeah, it makes me think of Jesus teaching in John 15, where he literally says, "Apart from me, you can do nothing."
There it is,
and which is like probably one of the most direct that Jesus gets, where he's like it's very clear, like you can't do anything apart from me. But man, don't we want to, and don't we want to try, and don't we prefer that way? And
you see it. The beauty of the New Testament is that almost every concept that's given to us in the New Testament is showed in a story in the Old Testament. Mm. And you look through the forefathers of Abraham, Moses, David, and they could do some pretty significant things in their own power, but then it got to a point where they couldn't get any further. I mean, Moses could lead all of those people to the edge of the Red Sea, but until God did something, they were stuck. And and so it's continually looking and saying, yes, you're a significant human being. You've been invested in with significant talents and abilities and perspectives and intellect and all those things. But there's a point where you can't do it anymore. And if you want more for your life, if you want to be more of the person that God created you to be, it's going to take his involvement in it.
And just like, as we wrap up here, I think that like there's kind of always been the whole conversation. You can kind of take stuff in two ways, and you can take that in a way that's like depressing or sad, or like, I can't do anything by myself, or you can respond in a way that's like, but God wants to help me. Like the God of the universe who created everything, who loves me and values me so much that he's willing to die for me. Like he's with me, giving me the ability to go through this thing with him. Mm-hmm. And to me, like if you're able to frame it that way, which is true, gosh, it's so much more helpful. And I think empowering than the other like way to think about it.
Mm-hmm. I think our biggest struggle is that we actually are capable of a lot. We're just not capable of all of it. And that's where we run into trouble.
Yeah. Brodie, thank you so much. I know long weekend and teaching and, maybe even the brain's a little mush, but it doesn't seem like it. It seems like you're sharp as can be. So if you need to go take a 6-hour nap, you do whatever you need to do.
I have now received permission. I'll take you up on it.
Okay, good. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you, Brodie. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Well, that was my conversation with Brodie, and I want to highlight two things. One, I do think that principle of leaning in really is so impactfful, and this idea of relying on God, but in a way that just it furthers your connection with Him and builds out who you are as a person and in your faith to face things in the future as well as the thing you're currently going through. But then two, having that no-quit team, those people surrounding you that are impacting your life in a positive way to get through those challenging seasons. If you don't have people like that in your life, you haven't had a chance to connect with them or talk to them or make those friendships, I want to encourage you to get plugged into a Ridge group. We have people that want to build friendships and meaningful relationships and connect with each other, help each other out in their faith journey. And so you can do that. You can head into the show notes, the description of this video, and you can find a Ridge group. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Ridge Podcast. And make sure you like and subscribe so you don't miss any hopeful and helpful conversations.